Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as we started the proceedings this morning, one would not believe that the country had experienced 31 COVID deaths, and the cases of COVID positivity were between 20 and 30% of people tested. We saw all sorts of indicators of election material, boundaries, all manner of things that, to my mind, were not relevant at this time based on the crisis that we are facing. But I'm not surprised. It's a concerted attempt to deflect from the seriousness of the situation in the country and to go on a frolic of the government's own, to continue to behave as if life is good and things are normal, not to understand the sufferings of the people, what the people are suffering under this COVID situation, the people, the children who have lost about a year of education because they could not go to school because of COVID and they didn't have any tablets or laptops, not understanding the people who are suffering at the respiratory hospital. Instead, Mr. Speaker, we come here and we boast and we gesture because we believe that propaganda and hype can change the reality. The reality, Mr. Speaker, is that the COVID situation is real. And the very fact that the government and the World Bank has understood that they can borrow to St. Lucia and Dominica, or St. Lucia in particular in that case, $30 million US, which is in effect a little less than 90 million EC dollars, is testimony to the seriousness of the situation. But as usual, we believe that we can deflect and we can jive and we can use words in certain ways that the people will forget the situation they are in. But as we speak, Mr. Speaker, 31 people who have died, and I would think that it would have been proper this morning for us to observe a minute of silence for these people who have lost their lives. And I know it might have slipped you, because, Mr. Speaker, these are real people. These are not objects. These are people who have families. These are people who have died in pain, Mr. Speaker. But we come here and we try to deflect it and we try to move away from the situation because we do not want to face that reality. Mr. Speaker, the government has promised that they would have given us an account of the money spent for COVID-related matters. The Prime Minister laid on the table a document that showed $15 million for COVID-related expenses. That was a document that was laid on the table. As these days, Mr. Speaker, we seem to be using the House for statements, for political statements. So this morning, the Prime Minister made an announcement of some boundary business, and what the only thing that he has laid on the table is a report from the Commonwealth Secretariat. But he spoke at length, Mr. Speaker, all kind of aspersions, but he has not produced that document. I'm just noting, because, you know, we come in, we get self-righteous and talk about the Constitution, who obeyed it, and who is doing this and who is that, and we are perfect, and we are the best government ever. But these legal things, Mr. Speaker, These things, Mr. Speaker, whereas this morning a statement was laid in this honorable House, and a statement has not been presented on the table. But, Mr. Speaker, I will not go further. I will get back to the dangerous situation that we have in this country while we try to deflect, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the government did not cause COVID, but the government has to look into itself and say whether they could not have done certain things differently. Whether the government could not have used the resources differently. Whether the government could not have boasted later rather than sooner. Whether the government has its priorities right, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'll give an example. You don't have to be a doctor to know that when you have a respiratory illness, you need oxygen. As we speak, Mr. Speaker, there are people at Victoria Hospital who are in need of oxygen because, Mr. Speaker, when you are in a position where you need oxygen, the oxygen that you need it rapidly, Mr. Speaker. If the government was thinking, when the government have used some of these resources to make oxygen more readily present for the people who will inevitably need it when the side effects of COVID begin to appear, Mr. Speaker, wouldn't that be something that the government should have thought of? And if the government had listened to the medical expert, Mr. Speaker, you see, instead of listening, Mr. Speaker, and instead of understanding what is being said, they go on the tower, they go on the high horse, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Member for Swaza.
Speaker, a point of order, the member may not be aware, and maybe that's one of the reasons why he's saying what he's saying, but only recently we provided concessions, Mr. Speaker, for oxygen to be, for the various equipment for oxygen to be produced in St. Lucia. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Mr. Speaker, I am happy that the minister is becoming a politician. I never said, I said what we need now, not whether they had sent this oxygen. That's not the point. The point is, as we speak now, today, this morning, there is need for oxygen at the hospital. That's the point I'm making. So I applaud him. I applaud him for giving incentives for an oxygen. I applaud him. That's good. He's working very hard. But I'm saying, as we speak now, there are patients in the hospital who need oxygen, and it would be easier if they had that oxygen available already. That's the point, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Member,
Mr. Speaker, a point of elucidation.
Are you giving way, Honorable Member?
Mr. Speaker, how do you mean I have to give way?
Honorable Member, are you giving way?
No, Mr. Speaker, no, I'm not.
Very well, Honorable Member. Continue, good sir.
Mr. Speaker, the government, Mr. Speaker, fails to understand that the people of St. Lucia are suffering. They fail to understand that there are people as we speak who are hungry. There are people as we speak who are in need of basic requirements, Mr. Speaker. Basic requirements, Mr. Speaker. And instead of using the resources to help these people, to help the vendors, help the minibus drivers, to help the minibus drivers, to help the vendors, to help the people who are in need, who have suffered from COVID. Because you see, Mr. Speaker, it looks like the government believes that because one sector of the economy may not have suffered from COVID, that the rest of the population has not suffered, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, if you go to speak to people on the streets, They will even speak to the civil servants that their spouse, their partner has lost their job in an hotel. They will tell you the sufferings that they are undergoing, Mr. Speaker. And there seems to be no sympathy. There seems to be no sympathy for these people. There seems to be no concern for these people. Only what you seem to be concerned of is plain politics, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, why did Dominica and Barbados get vaccinations before St. Lucia? St. Lucia boasts of being the most progressive country in the region with a great minister of this and that and the best this and that. Why did Dominica and Barbados procure vaccinations before St. Lucia? If the government was proactive, as they say, if the government was concerned, as they profess to concern, why St. Lucia had to be at the mercy of Barbados and Dominica for vaccinations? Why? Didn't the government drop the ball, Mr. Speaker? St. Lucia should be up front, because St. Lucia was in a worse position as far as COVID is concerned than Dominica. St. Lucia is in a worse position than Dominica, but the Dominica government was proactive enough to get vaccinations before St. Lucia. And now the government is going to India. But Dominica went to India also. Why did Dominica get it before St. Lucia, Mr. Speaker? And talking about vaccinations, Mr. Speaker, I want to very, 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 very quickly, Mr. Speaker, if you would allow me, to show you how these government surrogates are petty. And everything for the government is cheap politics, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if you allow me, I received an email, a professional email from the CMO, a private email addressed to me, telling me if I will accept being vaccinated, I think on Sunday next week in the public domain at the command center. I responded under the same cover. I thanked her for invitation. I congratulated her on the progress that she made as far as vaccination is concerned. And I said to her, I will not take the vaccination now because I believe that the people who are up front, Mr. Speaker, who are the ones taking in the front of the battle, the first responders should take it before me. That was a private correspondence. That never went into public. The government surrogates, right after Mr. Speaker, they believe that that's something to pounce on. So they begin to play politics with it. I never made my position public. Never. It's government surrogates. When they got the information, they were on Facebook, all over the place, Mr. Speaker, trying to play politics. Just an example, Mr. Speaker, of how this government is petty, how the surrogates are petty. And they always seem to be looking to make a political point, Mr. Speaker. Always seem to make a political point. So the situation is that you believe you can score a cheap point because I decided. And in my 7-point plan, I had said before that the government should move on vaccinations. That was the 7-point plan. I was the first person to make that proclamation about vaccinations in my 7-point plan, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, when the government dropped the ball and they had to depend, while people here were dying, they had to depend on Dominica and Barbados to give them vaccinations. Up to now, they cannot say, apart from what they hope to receive from CARICOM, from COVID, when they will get the vaccinations from India. They cannot say what day the vaccination from India will arrive. And if the vaccinations from India arrive, I'll be very grateful to the government of India. But this government dropped the ball, and that is why they only had 3,000 vaccinations for 1,500 people, Mr. Speaker. And that is how they boast about being able to manage COVID properly, Mr. Speaker. You don't have the foresight to know that you have to put things in place to get the vaccination, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Member, I'm not going to take you away, but remember the resolution before us, sir.
Mr. Speaker, I'm saying that the government could have used some of that money that they are borrowing to buy vaccinations. Mr. Speaker, is the government managing the COVID situation properly? That is the question we have to ask ourselves, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, look at the conditions at the Victoria Hospital. Mr. Speaker, the government painted outside and came here boasting. They came here and they painted the Victoria Hospital, Mr. Speaker, and they were here boasting, Mr. Speaker, that the hospital was painted, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, do you know? And you see, it's that lack of feeling. So what they do is they say,
Honorable Member.
I stand on a point of order.
Point of order.
The member has been consistently and persistently misleading the House this morning. I tried to stand previously on a point of elucidation to enlighten the member so that he would desist from misleading the House on the information that he is giving. So he has refused. So it leaves me with no choice but to stand on a point of order and to say to him that what he is saying about Victoria Hospital is grossly misleading. Mr. Speaker, I cannot even find the adequate words, because anybody who goes to VH today will know that it is not the outside of the hospital that is painted. The World Bank, through the rapid facility, allowed us to access funds to retrofit VH into a respiratory hospital with individual isolation rooms and double rooms, each set with its own bathroom, with air condition, with UV light to destroy the virus as it is being extracted. For the member, a responsible member of this parliament, to come and mislead the House, and he said it about the oxygen. Where is the proof that there's a shortage of oxygen at Victoria Hospital? That's just his word. But he does not even know that we have procured a full oxygen plant that will be set up in the south of the island for St. Jude and to augment the supply. And that is what I was trying to enlighten the member. Do not come to the Honorable House and mislead the House with false information, because everybody knows that it is not a pen job that was done at VH. It is a full refurbishment, and the World Bank, you can go and see the report. We got glowing accolades for the implementation of the retrofitting of Victoria Hospital as a respiratory hospital. So the member needs to desist or withdraw the false information he's given to the parliament.
Honorable Member, you heard the Minister. I don't have the information.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
But,
Mr. Speaker, my information...
But all I'm saying to you, good sir, is stick to the position that will not cause you to be in a position to mislead this House.
Mr. Speaker, the member for Southeast Castries has never been a patient at Victoria Hospital. My information is from patients at Victoria Hospital, Mr. Speaker. So all what he's saying, my information that I'm procuring now, is from people at Victoria Hospital. So what he's saying, Mr. Speaker, is just as usual, his political thing, talking to the gallery and not to me. So I move on, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker,
Mr. Speaker,
I stand on a point of order again. I did not speak as a patient. I spoke as the minister with responsibility for the work implemented, and I can verify that the work that was done, that the information you are giving is misleading. I'm not the one responsible for the patients, Mr. Speaker. But when it comes to the work, the designs, and everything, because remember, Mr. Speaker, the issue is that his point was that all we have done is repainted the outside of the hospital. And basically we are trying to fool the people of St. Lucia. And I am saying that all the evidence is there to show that the hospital has been properly retrofitted as a respiratory hospital with the necessary equipment.
Honorable members. Honorable members. I don't have an issue with one side saying this is it and the other side saying this. But this is the Parliament of St. Lucia. And we need, if we're going to have the back and forth, we need the true picture somewhere on a projector or somewhere. I am saying to the people that, I'm saying to you, honorable members, this is the Parliament of St. Lucia, where we represent the voices of our people on the outside. So, honorable member, take note from the minister. He is saying that from the ministerial point of view, not just the painting of the outside, but more work has been done on the inside.
Mr. Speaker,
on the point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Yes, what's that?
Mr. Speaker, the member said that he was getting information from a person who had stayed there. Equally, Mr. Speaker, I get information. So, PM, I understand you're going to VH. I would love to come with you if it's not okay. I'm sending the name of the doctors and nurses I would like you to meet. Please let them know how much I love them and appreciate their professionalism. I was in Ward 9, Room 9, and it was there that I experienced how passionate and hard-working these workers were. Dr. Griffith, Dr. Sherry, Dr. Charles, Dr. Matra, Dr. Celestian, Dr. Santiago, nurses, Celine Atsitudor, Thea Harris, Zenith Gittins, Asher Reynolds, Julietta Ford, all the Cuban doctors. Mr. Speaker, I just want to say that equally there are many people who are contacting me on a regular basis, Mr. Speaker, indicating how professional and how grateful they are for the services they've received under very difficult circumstances, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister and members on both sides of this House, I don't have, and I don't think there is an issue if one side saying the position, whether it is presented by patients and otherwise. Some patients say good, some patients say it's not good. We, as a parliament, we have never been, and I'm saying to you that whether it's a position of government, the position must be put before the parliament. Okay? But I'm saying, even if the government said it's painted properly and the opposition said it's in the worst state, it is one side putting forward a position to the other side. I'm asking members not to put themselves in a position to mislead this House and the people of St. Lucia. Right? Continue on.
Mr. Speaker, you allow the Prime Minister to read from a phone message from a patient. Can I do the same? Because he started.
Honorable members, we're not going back and forth.
Mr. Speaker, he opened the speaker.
Not going back and forth,
he opened the door, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister opened the door. He opened the door, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable members.
Why you allowed him to open the door?
I did not allow him to close it either.
But I want to open mine, Mr. Speaker.
Okay.
I want to open. I want to walk into the door.
Honorable member.
The door is open.
Continue with your presentation.
Mr. Speaker, my information, Mr. Speaker, is that there are certain patients at Victoria Hospital who are suffering, and the room they are in is in a horrible position. That is the information that I have, Mr. Speaker. That we should have made adequate preparation for these people so that they could not have been in the condition they are in at Victoria Hospital. That's the point I'm making. And if the Prime Minister wants evidence from telephones, I have evidence from a telephone also. Mr. Speaker, they seem to be very apt in telephones, Mr. Speaker, because they know what they're doing with them. Mr. Speaker, this government refuses, Mr. Speaker, to face the reality that people in this country are suffering. They refuse to face that reality, and they do not want us to say it. But that is what, go to the Constitutional Park now, Mr. Speaker, and ask the people there, not red people or yellow people, they are suffering, Mr. Speaker. The children who want laptops, Mr. Speaker, and Tablets and laptops are being used as political tools, Mr. Speaker, and that is why some of that money should be used to buy, to have an equitable distribution of tablets and laptops, not to give political operatives tablets and laptops to play politics with. And I'm saying that in that whole COVID treatment, the government has dropped the ball because the government has been too concerned with politics instead of the lives and the sufferings of the people of St. Lucia. That is the point I'm making, Mr. Speaker. That is the point I'm making, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we made a point about the opening of the country. We made a point about the opening of the country, Mr. Speaker. We made that point that the government should have been more diligent in the opening of the airports or opening the borders, Mr. Speaker. We said so. The government instead blamed Matnik, backdoor. Blamed the backdoor for the increase in the COVID situation in the country. As we speak today, Mr. Speaker, Matnik is in a better position as far as COVID is concerned than St. Lucia. So Matnik now has St. Lucia in a position where we now are the back door for Matnik. Speaking too early, Mr. Speaker, not waiting for the scientific evidence before they make pronouncements. Because as soon as they hear something, pounce on it for political gain. And that is why the people of St. Lucia have no confidence that the government, the money the government will borrow will affect them, it will help them. The vendors and the small businesses and the farmers have no confidence because up to today they haven't sent bananas to Martinique. They have no confidence that when the government says that they will use the money for their welfare, the people of St. Lucia do not believe them, Mr. Speaker. And that is the point that I'm making, Mr. Speaker. Because the government consistently and persistently makes promises, Mr. Speaker. A few minutes ago, you heard about investment. We were told there'd be $1.2 billion of investment and 8 new hotels before COVID. We were told that before. So when we come here and we boast now and try to create a situation that doesn't exist, Mr. Speaker, the people of St. Lucia, we have lived it. We have seen it. We have heard these boasts. We have heard these things before. And that is why it's so difficult for the people of St. Lucia to believe these things when we speak about how we will use money that we borrow from the World Bank, Mr. Speaker. That is the question. We have understood that these things are said and they never happen, Mr. Speaker. They are politically expedient things to say at the moment for electoral advantage. And now it's going to be worse, Mr. Speaker, because of what is happening very shortly in a few months, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the people of St. Lucia, Mr. Speaker, they are concerned, Mr. Speaker, that when will we reach a situation when we will be able to adequately state what rate of positivity is acceptable? It fluctuates, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Right now, based on the testing that is taking place, I'm going to be very conservative, between 15 and 30% of the people, the people who were tested, there's a positivity rate between 15 and 30%, Mr. Speaker. That is called the R rate, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have to reach a situation where the people, where we have a particular aim. What is the objective? What is the objective, Mr. Speaker? What are we?
Mr.
What is
Speaker,
the scientific marker that we are? What is the scientific? No, Mr. Speaker.
Yes,
what is the scientific marker that we are leading to? What is the marker, Mr. Speaker? What is the R rate? Are we aiming for a 5%, a 10%, or 50%, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, we need to have some scientific basis as to what we are aiming for. What is the government's aim? Because I'll say it again, Mr. Speaker. The government did not create COVID. Mr. Speaker, the point I am making, Mr. Speaker, is that the government is dealing with the situation willy-nilly. if the government was serious, and I come back to the vaccinations, Dominica and Barbados will not be ahead of us as far as vaccination is concerned. And that is the point that they must consider and agree that they dropped the ball as far as that is concerned, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in plain politics again, the governments and its surrogates on their favorite radio station are saying that the Labour Party will close the call centers. Politics again, Mr. Speaker. Politics. Politics again. Mr. Speaker, this Labour, when we were this Labour Party, Mr. Speaker, we were the ones who created the enabling environment to expand the call centers in St. Lucia. It was this Labour Party that created, we brought in call centers from Jamaica. They operated on the highway. Call centers at Union, where they were employed, a local St. Lucia entrepreneur was involved. We worked and assisted him. We got criticized at the time by the opposition for helping this St. Lucian entrepreneur to go into the call center business. So call centers are not new to us. We were the ones who caused the call center business to mushroom and to expand in St. Lucia, Mr. Speaker. But right now, what we are saying is that if you have call centers as an essential service, you must put in adequate safeguards and adequate precautions to protect the workers in these call centers, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I spoke to somebody in Jamaica where call centers are open, and they gave me the protocols that have to be observed if call centers have to operate. So it's not that the Labour Party will close call centers. That is the usual cheap political propaganda. What the Labour Party is saying is if you have exposed hundreds of young people at a call center, you must put in the adequate safeguards. So I want to assure the people of St. Lucia, Mr. Speaker, that a Labour Party would have used some of that money to help the call center operators to put the necessary safeguards to protect the workers at the call centers, Mr. Speaker, and not the propaganda of we'll close call centers, Mr. Speaker. And that is the problem. The government is they're so politically, electorally politically driven, and accuse people all the time of being the same, as if they were never in opposition, as if they never said we have an orange match for fuel for $6.80, or only to come back and say that wasn't true. They play as if they are self-righteous, and they are self-righteous, and everybody else is wrong, Mr. Speaker. So in the handling of COVID, the government has fallen on its own sword because of the fact that they do not tell St. Lucians the facts, and when the facts happen, they try to slant it for political purposes, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm hoping that the government tells the public of St. Lucia exactly how they intend to spend what has actually been spent on the COVID response. Because it is our belief that the government's priorities are not right, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we will speak about that at some other point. Why must the government think at this point that they can spend $20 million on 2 miles of road in Groseley? $20 million on 2 miles of road in Groseley, Mr. Speaker. Tell me what relevance that is now or in the immediate future, Mr. Speaker, when you have a situation where people are hungry because of the COVID crisis. Mr. Speaker, I would like the government to tell me, Mr. Speaker, $20 million, Mr. Speaker, on 2 miles of road without tender.
But tie it to the resolution before.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm talking about the use of borrowed funds, Mr. Speaker. I'm speaking about the use of borrowed funds. And Mr. Speaker, this government is so self-righteous.
Mr. Speaker, on a point of order again, the member knows that this is a design finance construct project. This is not something that came where there's any borrowed funds for this project. So to try and tie the project to the borrowed funds in terms of what we are doing here, Mr. Speaker, is misleading.
Mr. Speaker, you see, when the design finance contracts have to be repaid, they have to be repaid. They have to be repaid the same way that loan has to be repaid. Design finance projects are public funds, and I'm glad he went there because...
Honorable Member, I'm not sure where he went. All I'm saying to you, tie it to the resolution before us. That's all I'm saying to you.
Mr. Speaker, I'm speaking about loan repayments of the $40 million, Mr. Speaker. And the design finance contract is a 5% is a loan at 5%, Mr. Speaker, over a shorter period of time. It's similar to a car loan. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, we are talking about, Mr. Speaker, the borrowing of the 80 million EC dollars, Mr. Speaker. That is the question. And I'm saying to the government that we should find ways of making that $80 million, allowing the people of the country to benefit from it directly. The people of the country, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, the government has failed in the management of COVID. They began to boast too early. They began to beat their stomachs, beat their chests too early, Mr. Speaker. And right now, 31 deaths later, and over 3,000 people have been exposed, Mr. Speaker. The government now is caught in their own web, and the only way they can come out is by deflection. The only way they can come out is by flashing mirrors. The only way they can come out of this web is by playing cheap politics to take them out from the web that they have created. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.